Hello there, and welcome from all of us at Common Sense to the first webinar of this school year. I'm Lisa Solomon, and I head up the Connected Schools program, which is a community of more than 100, mostly independent schools, who, among other things, make these important webinars happen. If your school isn't a member and you want to learn more about this program, please get in touch. I'll put my email in the chat shortly. We're doing something a little bit different tonight by dividing our conversations into two parts. The title is A Turning Point, the Push-Pull of Tech in Our Kids' Lives, which is a big topic. So first, we'll talk with two specialists in the education space who can shed light on how cell phone bans are being implemented around the country. And for the second half, we will talk with two parenting experts who are dealing with these issues firsthand, and we will offer advice that you can use. We'll also touch briefly on the changing landscape of AI in the classroom as well. From feedback we've gotten from many of you, which is parents in our national network, it's clear that many of you are feeling more than the usual amount of stress about managing technology. I hear this all the time. I think it's in part because of the cell phone bans that are rolling out in many schools, and also because technology is increasingly integrated into our lives. Whether it's AI talking to Siri or smart devices, it is a lot to manage, especially with our younger children. It feels like a crucible moment for parenting, and this was articulated by the US Surgeon General this past summer, Vivek Murthy. He said it is a particularly stressful time to be a parent and caregiver. So we're here tonight to help. The reasoning behind pulling back on cell phones at school is sound, and it helps to keep those goals in mind as we're in the midst of this change. We want to ensure that kids are focused on learning and socialization. We want them to sleep more and find things they love and are good at in real life. Even as we want to help them embrace the advances that tech brings into our lives, including AI, it's also a tall order that requires us all to work together to equip kids for their futures and ensure they're both tech savvy and also adept at balancing the lure of screens. I'm sure that balance resonates with many of you. First, a few housekeeping items for this next hour. Please know that our team has read all of the questions submitted ahead of time, and many have been threaded into the preparation for this conversation. If you are joining us live, we'll be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to share comments and questions. I will also be putting in live resources that you can tap into. Okay, let's meet our first set of panelists. First up, Claire Goldsmith is a consultant in strategy and educational innovation for schools and nonprofits. She's taught at LA's Harvard Westlake and led admissions at Stanford Online High School, where she founded and then directed the Malone Schools online network. Claire advises a range of educational institutions and chairs the Enrollment Management Association. She holds degrees from Harvard and Stanford, with recent writing featured in the Wall Street Journal all about AI in education and smartphone policies. Next up, we are delighted to welcome Allison Klein. She is a reporter at Education Week, where she covers technology and student well-being. And she also edits the publication's annual Leaders to Learn From report. Allison's appeared on NPR, CNN, C-SPAN, and the PBS NewsHour to talk about education issues and news of the day. And next up, I'm going to hand this over to today's moderator, my colleague Merv Lapus. He's Common Sense's Vice President of Education Outreach, which just means, among so many other things he does, he and his team work with thousands of school districts and a wide network of educators around the world. So Merv, I'm going to hand this over to you, and thank you so much for running this conversation.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome to our panelists, Allison and Claire, for the first half of today. Just good evening to everyone. I really want to start by taking us back first to March, which frankly feels like a lifetime ago now, but that's when Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, was published. And since then, the conversation about the role of tech in our lives has really ramped up considerably, right? Haidt has effectively rung an alarm bell, and policymakers are responding by starting it to institute restrictions on cell phones in the classroom. And social scientists think that Haidt's argument is a little too simplistic, and yet a genuine widespread concern of our kids' mental health, and has really compelled policy makers to do what they can to maximize learning and reduce the harms. And it does really feel like an inflection point at this time. So As cell phone bans are causing maximum anxiety in families, precisely because it kind of puts the onus back on parents and caregivers to manage their kids' phones in more limited parts of the day when they are actually online. At Common Sense, we don't see technology as all good or bad, but we know that finding balance is tougher than ever. We want to look at how we got to this place, and we'd love to really to start with like Claire and Allison to kind of hear from you, our parenting experts, and then we're going to switch over to Hina and Jackie, who we'll introduce later, about how we're going to manage these changes in our household. All that said, Claire and Allison, let's start with you. How did we get here, and why is this a good idea? Claire, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. So this seems like a new topic in some ways because it came on the scene with such force this summer. But it's actually an old topic. It's really a lot about the role of technology in our kids' lives, in schools. This conversation started when pagers came on the scene and students could take them to school. Then we got to a place where it was bring your own device, and schools were actually encouraging students to bring smartphones to school to use for learning. We started becoming aware of the distraction factor, and that came at the same time as there was this national conversation about a mental health crisis among adolescents. And so Jonathan Haidt's book, really came at a moment that got us all focused on this mental health issue with devices in schools, distraction, social media, the Surgeon General's warning. And all of that really coalesced in a moment where I know that personally, I started hearing from heads of school all over the country about their thoughts on banning smartphones in their schools and how they might do that. It's really accelerated with here in LA. Recently, Harvard Westlake came out with a new policy. We've also had Los Angeles Unified School District say that phones will be banned starting in January. So why is this a positive step? There are a few reasons. First of all is that mental health reason, again. Growing concern over cyberbullying, over the role of deep fakes, over even the rise potentially of eating disorders linked to body image issues coming out of social media. These things do tend to correlate with the rise of smartphone use and social media. I recently heard from a school that banned smartphones and their cafeteria sales actually went up. Well, why is that? Well, they noticed that actually when phones were all over school, students weren't eating in the lunchroom for fear of being filmed. And once they put some guardrails on and took the phones out of the lunchroom, students started eating again. So that mental health and health factor is a huge one. A few others I'll mention briefly. Certainly prioritizing learning. Teachers in a lot of classrooms have become the phone police instead of just being able to do their jobs. And so removing smartphones from the classroom allows students to focus on their teacher instead of on TikTok, and to allow the teacher to focus on teaching and not breaking up fights or really policing, potential cyberbullying going on. Certainly, this is also about improving social skills. There are these silent lunchrooms and silent corridors where students were on their phones all the time. We also have had a challenge with parents being kind of over-involved, texting students during the school day. Anytime there was a little disappointment with friends, children could reach out to their parents as kind of a safety net to help them through social situations. And so a lot of us feel that taking the smartphones out of school will allow students to focus on those really essential social skills once again.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack. They're all super helpful. I'm wondering, however, Allison, thinking through all that, is that the case around the country, these types of issues and examples that were shared?
Yes, absolutely. So this is not a time, this is not a political discussion, but I think we can all agree this is not a time of intense bipartisanship in the US. However, cell phone bans are one area where red and blue states, are kind of holding hands and singing from the same sheet of music. Right now, there are 15 states across the country that either incentivize cell phone bans at the district level, recommend some sort of cell phone policy, preferably a ban, require some sort of policy, or have a statewide restriction. And those states are as diverse, right, as California, Gavin Newsom, governor there, and Florida, where, obviously Governor Ron DeSantis doesn't have very much else in common with the California governor. So this is definitely an issue where we're seeing a lot of movement across the political spectrum. No one likes cell phones in schools.
Yeah, interesting. Well, so at Common Sense, we are definitely seeing school districts moving in this direction, but it's clear that creating and implementing the policy is tricky, right? We're glad to see that policymakers are actually also carving out some exceptions, especially for kids and families who have specific needs when it comes to personal devices. But what are the broader practical considerations of putting these policies in place? Claire, maybe you can elaborate.
Sure. And I give policymakers a tremendous amount of credit. I think about Nick Melvoin, who's here in LA on the LAUSD school board, and who really spearheaded the effort to put this policy into place, because it is hard. It is hard, but it's worth it because of the growing evidence. So why is it hard? And what are some of the issues on people's minds? So first of all, there are plenty of devices that students have in school that they're using for learning, whether laptops, Chromebooks, iPads, et cetera. And so they're connected anyway. And so schools are also grappling with policies around those devices and how that might fit in. The actual logistics of putting phones in pouches and then releasing them to students at the end of the day is something I hear about constantly from school leaders. That's just a logistical challenge to figure out. Certainly, there is the concern about parents wanting or needing to reach children during the school day. It could be for a change of the pickup time, but it could also be in an emergency. So that's a major national conversation. Schools are really having to think about how they work with parents to let them know how they're going to let them contact their students if necessary and what the new protocols will be. I think the other point here is that, in a sense, not being on technology has started to become kind of a point of privilege. Our conversation going back decades has been about getting technology in every child's hand in school. And now many schools are saying, well, actually, the privilege is being able to get rid of them and take them out. But that's not necessarily true for everyone. Of course, there are plenty of students in school who have jobs, who themselves have childcare responsibilities. And so working out the equity issues around phone use in school, who's allowed to have them, what message are we sending to which population, that's a really important piece that is also having to be sorted out.
Yeah, that's incredibly important. Allison, what are you seeing in your work?
Sure. So when you talk to teachers about cell phone bans, you'd think that they would be all for them, right? But as Claire alluded to, it can be really hard to become the cell phone police, right? To have some teachers put up a cell phone spa or a cell phone caddy that they'll put up in their room and call it the cell phone spa. But students don't want to put their phones in there. They don't like being separated from their phones. It makes them anxious. No pun intended on the anxious generation. And then also some school districts, including New York City, have reversed their bans, right? Because it was really hard to enforce them equitably. In some New York City schools, especially in less affluent areas, local businesses were charging students to hold their cell phones for the day, right? Because the students would need them for exactly the reasons that Claire just outlined. Right when school ended, maybe they had a second job, maybe they did have childcare. And so they were having to spend $1 a day or more to have their phone kept safely at a local business. And it just became unfair. So this is, it is a very tense issue. Parents are obviously not 100% on the same page here. I talked to one superintendent in Rhode Island who said a parent told her, you can ban cell phones when you start paying my phone bill. So teachers and administrators are up against a lot here, and these bans aren't always popular.
Yeah, there's a lot to have to consider when we're talking about the whole community and their experiences and expectations with how they hope to be able to communicate with their kids, and also value the value of that time in our education spaces. So while we are working to get cell phones out of the classroom, there's actually more tech in schools than ever, including artificial intelligence. In fact, we got many variations of this simple question from our audience, which was, if we're getting phones out of the classroom, why is there so much homework and in-class work being done on screens? Claire, take a
Yeah,
stab at that.
it's a really important question. And I think it's actually always a question that's okay for parents to ask to educators and to their schools, sort of, what is your approach to technology generally? I would say that, there are incredible benefits to having technology in learning. And tech has really always played a role in education since the beginning of technology, whether it's the radio or the calculator even. It has the potential to personalize learning in a lot of ways and to do so much more. So it's really about thoughtful implementation of technology in school. There should always be a stated goal as to why students are being asked to use a particular online resource or pull out their tablets for something. And the human judgment of a teacher is actually really central here. So when done appropriately, this is about the human being in the driver's seat, the teacher, choosing what to use in the technology realm for a very particular reason. And again, it could be about different learning styles. It could be about a resource, exposing students to something they wouldn't see right then and there in the classroom. All kinds of ways of doing assessment. Technology is so embedded in education right now, and there's so many positives. As for AI, it's a tool right now. It's a tool in our schools. And when used well, I believe that it actually has the potential to deepen learning and to lead to all kinds of creativity in learning. And so shutting it out of learning, I think, is really turning our back on a powerful resource. But again, it has to be done thoughtfully with really careful human implementation, solving for students' mental health, for ethical reasons, for all kinds of, misinformation, disinformation. But if we can get our hands around the risks, there's a lot of potential there.
I really love that thoughtful intention and why we use it, how we use it, and when we do use it, how do we expect it to be presented and be a part of the way that we live and learn. Allison, what are you finding with teachers in terms of their intentions with using it?
Sure. So schools are really just at the very beginning of this conversation about what role AI can play in K-12 education. And as Claire very correctly said, there are real powerful benefits for this technology, and there are real potential downsides. I will say, though, that teachers do expect, as you can see on the slide here, that AI use is going to increase. We surveyed teachers last January. So this is about a 6-month-old survey. And more than half, 55%, said that they expected AI use to increase this next school year, which is the school year that we're currently in. So educators believe that students will need AI, right, in order to be prepared for the world of work when they graduate from high school. AI is already, whether we like it or not, part of our daily lives. And being AI literate, understanding what the technology can and cannot do, is going to be a really important college and career ready skill, but just a life skill, right? And especially when it comes to being able to understand when these algorithms or these AI powered technologies are, quote, hallucinating, meaning spitting out wrong information, and why they might be biased, in towards sort of a whiter, more Western viewpoint. They may seem all knowing and all powerful, but they're only as quote smart or powerful as the humans who program them, and they're just as flawed as the humans who've programmed them.
Sure. It's just moving so fast. Allison, you recently wrote about AI and school admission applications, which I thought we could talk about just briefly as an example of how fast the landscape is really changing. So
yeah, it's changing a lot faster than colleges can actually keep up with it. So one survey done by an organization called Foundry 10 noted that about a third of high school seniors who applied for college in the 2023-24 school year, that's last school year, acknowledged using an AI tool for help in writing admissions essays. So before you start freaking out that a bunch of kids cheated on their admissions essays, not all of them use the AI like to write their entire essay, right? Some of them used AI in much the same way a student might ask a parent, right, to read over their essays, which my dad did for me back in the 90s when no one had heard of AI. Certainly, no students had cell phones, and they'll use AI to have to check their grammar, to tighten up their writing, or to brainstorm topics. And certainly, help in college admissions isn't a new thing, especially at the most elite levels. Nearly a quarter of students admitted to Harvard University's class of 2027 paid a private consultant for help with their applications. So colleges aren't really sure what to do here, right? If they ban the use of AI in admissions, then they're really not putting students on a fair playing field. But they don't want a bunch of chat GPT produced essays. And at the same time, colleges really have no way of enforcing, even if they have, and Brown University actually does have like a no AI. You have to certify that you did not use AI in your application, but they have no way of enforcing that policy because none of the AI detectors that are out there don't work. So yeah.
Claire, do you have a quick hot take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of work with admission officers at the secondary school level, like for independent schools, and it's the same conversation. And in some ways, it's not a new conversation because having someone else write your essay or give you help is an age-old problem. And in fact, what I hear sometimes is this is actually an equity move because having AI available to everybody lets everybody have that kind of help. But I think schools need to be working on policies around this for sure.
Well, speaking on policy, so we're having to pivot in our policies about phones at school after all these years. And so it seems critical to get it right the first time when it comes to artificial intelligence because the stakes are so high. Claire, this one's for you. What are the opportunities here for educators and parents in this turning point moment?
So I actually see the smartphone ban topic and the AI topic as super connected because they're both really about helping students and young people reclaim humanity in the world of all of this technology. This is about engaging young people in conversations about how technology affects their lives. When are they in the driver's seat versus technology being in the driver's seat? And it's relevant in both. I mean, we don't want to move from the anxious generation to like the AI generation where AI has taken over everything. So this is the moment to be really communicating some key messages. One is that you've got to talk to young people about these policies, why they were put into place, why they matter, why they're about empowering young people, honestly, and how that's important. We need to also be having the conversation with parents about resetting the home-school boundaries, right? What does it mean if you can't contact your child all day? And what does that mean largely about how technology has changed our schools, our homes, et cetera? It's about modeling balanced technology relationships for our children. And that's for teachers and for parents, modeling that balance. And then it's also about really reteaching in-person communication skills, which many young people haven't focused on as much. How do you respond to somebody live when it's not just an emoji that you can send? And so that's actually an intentional conversation we need to start having about reteaching those conversation skills.
Oh my goodness, so much in there. Thank you both so much, Allison and Claire, for being a part of the discussion. I hope all of you all at home are providing them a round of applause. I'm sure they can hear it through your screens. But thank you for this terrific overview of the issues. Now, we'd like to offer strategies to manage this all at home. And it's time for me to introduce our second set of panelists. So thank you again, y'all. First up, we have Dr. Hina Tlaib, MD. She is a board-certified pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist and mother of two in elementary school. She cares for teens and families at her practice within the Atria Institute in New York City. Dr. Tlaib is a clinical associate professor of pediatrics and women's health at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. She is also a media spokesperson for the American Academy of Pediatrics, serves on the New York Common Sense Advisory Board Council, thank you very much, and a board member of the Sesame Workshops, Joan Gans Kunti Center, thank you. Dr. Tlaib leads a popular community on Instagram at Teen Health Doc, follow her, where you will find her most timely tips and stories. We are also welcoming Dr. Jacqueline Nisi. She is a clinical psychologist and assistant professor at Brown University. She also writes a very popular blog called Technosapiens, I follow, which shares her extensive work on the role of technology in young people's mental health and well-being and how adults can help. She is the lead editor of the Handbook of Adolescent Digital Media and Mental Health and has testified before Congress about teens and mental health. She's also the mother of 2 young kids. All right, let's start again with Jonathan Haidt's argument and unpack it from a parental point of view. There have been various proposals on how to handle this. Some, like Haidt, recommend banning social media until the age of 16 and waiting on phones until the age of 14. Others don't subscribe to strict age cutoffs quite yet. We'll start with you. From the perspective of adolescent health, what do you think?
That's a great question. This debate over age restrictions for social media and smartphone use is so complex, and there are valid arguments and valid feelings on both sides of this debate. And I think from an adolescent health perspective, I'd like to share just really quickly some of the arguments or some of the concerns that we think about on the pro side, pro for restrictions, and that could be including that our young people, especially our early adolescents, are just starting puberty. They're just starting to develop. They're just starting to go from concrete thinkers to developing higher thinking skills, and their bodies are changing. So they're so very sensitive about their bodies and self-conscious. And so they are more vulnerable to body image issues during this time. So younger adolescents, as they are particularly vulnerable and are particularly needing of our protections. So developing brains, then also sleep is so important as a reason why we might want to prioritize restrictions, and safety. And for this, I mean cyberbullying and predators and other things that are untoward that are online and that we do need to counsel and protect our young people from. And then on the other side, arguments or concerns against these sort of like by the year, age 14, age 16 restrictions would include education, like digital literacy skills, teaching digital literacy skills in a graded fashion in different ages looks different and is doable and is something we hope to encourage. Social connection is so important. As a teenager develops through adolescence, they start to really look at their friends and their friends' likes and really use that to help develop their own sense of identity. So educational opportunities, equity. We've in the first half of our session today, we've heard about equity and access, and that's also very important. And then I think for me, most importantly, on the side sort of against is each teen, each young person is unique, and they have their own unique and individual needs and individual maturities. And maturity is also a very dynamic thing in this age group as they're going through adolescence. So I invite you, if something that I do for myself as a pediatrician is I invite you also to do as parents, step out of this debate for a minute. This debate is very heavy. The edicts, the headlines, they can be very they are for me, they can be very fear-inducing, and they can really set us up to think very negatively sometimes about the state of our adolescence. So I invite you to step out of it for a moment and focus on your relationship with your child or your teenager, as I focus on my relationship with my patients. Focus on connection, focus on understanding, and let go a little bit for a moment, at least, of the guilt and the shame. Take a breath, and then let's think about using our sort of reason brain, making our best parenting decisions, our most informed parenting decisions once we give ourselves just a break. And so with that, adolescent health approaches that work for many different parts of how we counsel young people, but are very applicable here, are graded introduction, supervise. So you can supervise, you can touch base, you can restrict, and then you can sort of peel back as teenagers continue to mature. Education focus, I just spoke about before, including digital literacy skills, is so important, as well as online safety. And then family-based decisions. We do this with so much of adolescent health, but it's so important in this topic. Because really what you model is what they are hearing. Your actions are louder than your words. Sure. So family-based decisions, parenting the child in front of you. And lastly, really balance. Balance is such a part of this. So if you can look at your child holistically and look at how they're moving through their days, and glamorize the things that are online and offline. Don't just, if you come at it as this is the one thing that I want to optimize in my child. Remember, there are many things that make up your child and make up their day, make up their environments. And I'd like us to focus on all parts of that to keep them as supported as possible.
I really appreciate that. I'd actually like to kind of pivot then and ask Jackie. Jackie, what is the research telling us about this?
Yeah, so Hina, that was such an amazing overview of some of the issues here and things that parents can think about. Yeah, I think the research on this is complicated, as Hina mentioned. I think there's a lot of debate broadly, sort of on the societal level about what is the impact of smartphones and social media on teens' well-being and mental health. But I think the first thing to know about the research on this is that mental health is really complicated. So there are so many factors that play a role in mental health. It's almost never the case that only one factor is going to be causing a mental health concern. And I think sometimes we get so focused on the tech, social media conversation that we forget about all the other stuff. We forget about, like what Hina said, connecting with our child. I think there's a couple things for parents. I'm going to name 3 things that I think are just most relevant for parents to be thinking about when it comes to social media and mental health. The first is, what is the child actually doing on the device? So we know that there are so many different things that can be happening on social media. Some of them are going to be great for their well-being, and some of them maybe not so much. So really paying attention to what a child is doing on their device. Second, who is the child? So really knowing our individual kids, what are their unique strengths, vulnerabilities, what's working for them and not when it comes to their device use. And then third, what's happening offline. So really thinking about holistically about all the many factors that may be playing a role in a child's mental health outside of tech as well. I think that's a good place to start, is focusing on those 3 things and really focusing on, for our kids, what's working for them, what's working for us and for our families.
Those are all incredibly important. And these are things I actively think about just with my own kids as well. But then it's about the implementation of all that, right? Which can be really tricky for schools, but especially also for parents, as everyone really tries to find kind of solutions that work. So how can schools and parents kind of work together during this time? Do you have some ideas for us?
Yeah, it's funny, as these policies have been rolling out in the New York City schools and partner schools and my own children's school, I am reminded of the COVID time when we were having to work together as parents, as schools, as administrators, trying to figure out how these policies are going to be implemented. And the implementation was always the tricky part. And so one, I'm reminded that we got through that and we learned a lot about how to partner. And so I'm drawing on those skills. And so I'm going to answer this question more as a parent and share with you some of the experiences that I've had in my local community working through these same things, as I have 2 children in lower school. So the very first thing that I did is, and it sounds so silly, but, and I think she might be listening tonight, is I made a mom friend. I made a mom friend who had was sort of interested in these similar questions about how are we going to do this? What is the right thing to do? How do we keep our kids safe? And how do we do it together instead of doing it alone? And so we started talking, and then soon enough, we met a dad friend who also had these same ideas. And one thing that I've learned in doing this work is, unlike a lot of other school issues, and a lot of fathers, a lot of dads are really interested in this stuff because they also sometimes have more tech skills and are the ones in the house kind of handling some of these questions. So we got together, a group of parents, and as a connected school member, our school, we were very lucky to have a panel discussion with Common Sense Media, myself, and our school, the head of our school. And we invited all the parents to it for the lower school. And it opened up a beautiful opportunity to connect with other parents in the lower school. And so after that, what came from that were grade level discussions. And so what we helped try to organize were grade level coffees, like parent coffees, parent conversations. And this was really helpful because every grade actually ends up feeling a little bit different. I mean, honestly, every family is very different. And we learned very quickly that there are a lot of different sides to this, and people come at it from different ways. So when we partnered with our school, though, one thing that was very helpful is, they sort of level set, okay, we always had these policies, but they weren't really being enforced. And so we were able to help as parents by being more in the know about what the school has said, the rules are, what the consequences are. So that's all about communication and partnership as parents with your school. So that was another helpful learning, because a lot of these things weren't really at the forefront. And so, I think that the other thing that we've been learning a lot now is, as teens are getting there, as the policies have changed, so middle school and with high school, we're getting a lot of feedback. And so the more we have listening sessions, the more helpful it's been. So that is sharing it from a parent perspective. And hopefully that's helpful of what I've been doing. And it's not easy. It takes time, but it does feel like we're making a dent by doing it together.
For sure. Jackie, how about you?
I think that it's so helpful to hear that experience. And I'll just add a couple things that I think parents can do when it comes to these policies. First, most importantly, learn about what the school's policy is. I know that a lot of schools, because some of these policies have been implemented so quickly at the beginning of the school year, there are a lot of parents who aren't quite sure what the policy is. So be aware of what the policy is. If your school allows phones, I think that speaks to really being careful about setting your own boundaries for your child during the school day, having conversations with them about what is appropriate and not during the school day for using their device. You may want to actually teach them specific strategies for managing their use during the day. I think sometimes we think that this is just going to come automatically to kids, but it does not necessarily. So teaching them about features like do not disturb, putting their phone on focus mode. And then if the school does discourage phones or has a policy banning them during the school day, I think we can help kids, make plans with friends in other ways, sort of have other opportunities to connect with their peers, joining clubs, other in-person activities. And then if you're worried about safety, I think as a parent, just being aware of what you can do to contact your child if that becomes necessary during the school day.
Yeah. So interesting. It's so interesting also just because I'm hearing that, when kids do get their phones, they're completely like heads down, glued to their phones when they get back to them at the end of the day, to the point where in some cases, police departments are warning their citizens to drive carefully in your schools at 3:00 because every kid will have his or her phone down and not be paying attention to the traffic. But so as we think about where are they spending their time, why are their heads down? A lot of times it's really about social media in particular. And what is your advice about when to start and how to manage, etc.? Because we had many questions from parents who think their kids are addicted to social media. And just this week, several states, including California, have actually sued TikTok for their persuasive design and the ability to capture their kids' attention. So, Hina, what do we think about that?
Yeah, so my advice on how to manage starting specifically, and then kind of in an ongoing way, is number one, wait until your young person is asking you for a social media platform. There's no need for us to preemptively sit them down and offer, because we know enough to know, especially in early adolescence, that we want to delay. And so if we have that as sort of our goal, wait until they're going to ask you a question about it. And then when they do, be ready to lean in an open-minded way with curiosity, like in your heart, be authentic about it, and ask them a little bit about why now, which platform, what are your friends doing? Tell me a little bit more about their experiences. And you can learn so much by just listening to our young people. And so wait until they bring it up to you and then listen with curiosity. Next, you want to take your time, because you will never have more negotiating power than you do when your young person is asking to first get a new platform. So take your time with it. Take your time with it and really think about and talk about with your young person what your family values are, and go ahead and work and negotiate out a family media plan. We recommend that as pediatricians as a way for people to get a little bit more concrete about what our rules are going to be, what our limitations are going to be, and what our expectations are going to be. And so if you are, I think the last thing I would say is be okay with whatever your parenting decision is in this regard. You might decide to wait a little bit longer, and that might not be what your young person wants to hear, but you've been thoughtful about it. You've spent your time talking to them about it, and that's okay. And then just remember, social media is not a monolith. So I will remind us that sometimes we feel like it's an all or nothing, but it really isn't. There are many different platforms, and even within the many different platforms, there are tools that you can use to try and limit it. There are tools even outside of these platforms that you can use to limit time and limit access. And so it is a little bit more work on us to dig in and spend the time learning about those that the technology part of it. And I know Common Sense Media has lovely guides for each of the different platforms. So I think educating ourselves is an important part of this as well. And then, mind your own social media use. Again, nothing is louder to a teen's ears than what you are doing in front of them. So really take stock of what you're doing with your social media, and maybe bring your teens into it and show them what you're doing on social media as part of how they're learning about it too. I'd really like us to move to talking about skills. And that's something that we work very closely with teenagers about. And so I think the more you can bring them in and to your experience, and the more that you can dig into their experience and sort of do this work together in an ongoing basis is sort of how I approach this.
Yeah. Oh man. Jackie, I'd love to know, how do we navigate all this?
Yeah, I wish there was easy answers, and there's so many good pieces of advice in there, Hina. I think, I think that just coming back to this issue of time, sort of time spent with social media, we know that these technologies are designed in ways to make it really tricky for us to disengage, and that's true for adolescents. But it's hard for all of us, and I think that as parents, one thing we can do is really validate that this is hard. This is about the design of these technologies. It's hard for adults. It's hard for kids. And then because of that, I also think it's important for us to have some boundaries around this, helping our kids, set limits, helping them regulate their use. But when we're thinking about this question of time spent, I also don't want us to get so focused on the number of minutes that they're spending on the device. I think, as Hina mentioned, I think it's important to come back to this question of values. So for our kids, how do they want to be spending their time? And is their tech use getting in the way of that? Is it not? Having those conversations about, are they getting benefits from their tech use? So benefits of social media might be things like connecting with friends, having opportunities to make plans, to explore things with friends, to explore their interests and hobbies. All of these things can come up with social media. And I think, giving kids an opportunity to do that, and really talking to kids about where are they getting those benefits and where are they not, like what's working for them and what isn't, is really important.
All right. So now we're going to jump into a somewhat of a speed round. We're looking at time and we want to fit in a lot of things. But I'd like to briefly touch on another increasingly fascinating topic, artificial intelligence. Common Sense has new research on AI, which finds that 7 in 10 youth have already used at least one type of generative AI tool. As with early days on social media, young people are jumping in to play with and learn about Gen AI on their own, while their caregivers and educators are struggling to keep up, frankly. I want to ask each of you what you advise families when it comes to using AI at home. You are going to solve our problems all in one take right now. Let's start with you.
So when it comes to using AI at home, I advise parents to, use it themselves. I know a lot of parents who are actually using AI tools in their day-to-day, and I know a lot of parents who are haven't ever experimented with it. And so I think the first place is just start using an AI tool. Just get a little bit familiar with it yourself, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or there's so many options, but become a little bit familiar with it. And then of course, in an open-minded way, with curiosity in your heart, ask your teen if they've heard about these tools, if they've used these tools. And then I would actually really encourage using them together. There's no better way. And you can have a lot of fun with this. There's a lot of fun questions. There's a lot of fun prompts. There's a lot of ways to be very creative and to help, again, with brainstorming. And so I think experiencing it with your teen and having them, if they're ahead of you and they've learned it already, having them teach you. This is similar to how it was with even social media or phones. Often our young people were the ones who were teaching us about these platforms. And so in the same way with AI, I would lean into that and have them engage them in that way. Of course, there's also important conversations to have about safety. And I think Jackie will talk a little bit more about that. But you can also have a little bit of fun with it. When you hear things in the news, when you hear things that are happening amongst their friends, with Taylor Swift and the deep fakes, it was awful. But it's helpful to use those moments in media to have conversations with your teens.
For sure. Jackie, how about you?
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and I think I agree that the first thing I would say is use it together with your child. I think that co-use piece, we have a lot of evidence from the research about other types of tech and how co-using, parents using together with their kids, can make a big difference in terms of teaching our kids digital literacy, and I think that applies to AI as well. So I would encourage you to use it together, have fun with it, but also, of course, having conversations about the risks. We know there are real risks to these technologies, and I think it's important to talk to our kids about those. When having those conversations, I think it can be helpful to start out with questions. So as Hina mentioned, asking about what have they heard about generative AI? What have they heard other people are using it for? What have they heard are some of the risks or the challenges of using it? I think leading the conversations with those kinds of questions, our kids' answers may surprise us. And I think that can really guide where to take the conversation. The other thing I'll say that I think it's important to talk to our kids about, as we had mentioned, is the use of AI with schoolwork. So making sure they know, what your expectations are around that, making sure they know the school's policy around that, and making sure that's part of it.
I love that. Honestly, I talk to my kids about tech and how I use it and the things that I'm excited about every day. So then that way, when I talk about the things that I'm concerned about, it's not weird. And it's not the only time we talk is only when it's something's weird or awkward. We talk about it all the time. So then it allows me to kind of get into, have you seen something like this? I'm kind of curious, right?
Mhm.
Well, that's enough about me. We've got plenty of folks who have also chimed in with some questions. So I want to turn to one of the questions that we received from an audience member. And it says that it seems like my kid is often on Snapchat and scrolling somewhere, but actually doesn't know how to do simple tasks with tech, such as sending our family a calendar invite. It would be great if she would use her device more as a tool versus something that's just mind-numbing. And another question, which I love, how to lessen the desire of teens and preteens to be on social media such as TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat, as well as to use video games like Roblox, and really instead inspire them to pursue other interests. How do we navigate that? Any takers?
Sure, I can start. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, these are such good questions, such common questions. I think, the first thing I would say is maybe asking a question about that question, which is why we feel like we want to lessen the desire of teens and preteens to be on social media. I think when we're approaching this with teens, I think we want to be asking them why they have that desire. Like, what is it about the platforms that are really meeting a need that they have, whether it's connecting with friends or maybe they're playing games or some kind of problem solving, whatever it is, figuring out kind of what is driving that desire, which I think is very normative for teens, and then brainstorming if there's other ways they can get that in their lives. I think that is probably a good place to start. Are there other activities they could be doing, other things you could help them do that would kind of meet that same need? The other thing I was just going to mention is I don't know actually if there's necessarily anything wrong with occasional, the person said mind-numbing use. I don't know if there's anything wrong with that per se. I think it's okay to use tech to relax sometimes. We do that as adults. It's okay for our teens to do that as well sometimes. We just want to make sure that that's not the only strategy that they have for coping, the only thing that they're able to do to relax. So I'll stop there.
Hina, do you have anything to add to that question?
I think those are such great answers and thoughts about how to help them. When I work with a teenager, I'm seeing them, in a clinic setting, and oftentimes parents will whisper to me, "Talk to them about their phone. Like, that's the one thing I want to make sure you get in this visit." And so I try to please. And when I spend my time alone with a teenage patient, we have a conversation, and I often ask, because I have a limited amount of time, I often ask questions like, how satisfied are you with your cell phone use or with your social media use? Or I would like you to tell me in your own words, like, tell me the story of you and kind of what makes you you. What are the things that get you through the day? And if you just let them listen and tell them about themselves, it's very organizing for them, and they're able to share their worlds, and they're able to self-assess their cell phone use and their social media use pretty well when they know that you're not going to jump in with a lecture and you're just asking because you're curious. And so inviting them in to problem solve some of this, because they might say, I use it because for 20 minutes to relax after I've studied for an hour and I connect with my friends and it makes me feel good. I might say that's okay. That sounds like a healthy coping skill that you're using it in that way. But you want to ask, what might be sometimes we ask, what might it be crowding out? So of all the beautiful things that make up you and all the different activities and all the different family things that you guys do at home, what gets left out, or what goes missing sometimes because of the time spent? So inviting them into the conversation to problem solve themselves is something that I found to be very helpful.
I love that. I mean, because the reality is our kids are growing up in an age where, they are more connected, but they're not necessarily out and about connected in the way they used to be when we were growing up. And so they're going to find these spaces to be able to do that. And how do we help them navigate it in a healthy way, right? Before it kind of goes a little too long. I had another question that came in asking for suggestions on how to handle FOMO, the fear of missing out, right? Where our children feel at a loss when they just can't do what their peers are doing, or that they're even parent circles that are kind of like pressuring other parents to open up more screen time since other families are doing so for their kid. How do we navigate that?
It's I'll start. It's hard to be different. It's really hard to be different at many ages. It's especially hard to be different and feel different in adolescence, when you are looking to your friends for your identity development. And so I give it to them. It's a hard thing, but it's also okay to be different. And there are lessons to be learned there. There's resilience to be built there. So, you don't want to have, in an ideal world, you're not the last or second to last kid in your school, group that doesn't have a phone, because that is objectively really hard for a young person. But if we work together, if we can be a little bit more collective in this regard, and I know there's a lot of efforts going on and a lot of conversations to do that, that can help so that you're not in that situation. But you want to validate them, but you also want to be able to say, this is our decision as a family. And if you go back to those family values that you talk about, that weren't necessarily all about just social media, but family values that you had, blanket family values, you can tie some of these decisions to that. You can say, I'm sorry, we understand that this is difficult. Thank you for hanging in there and trusting us. Let's work this together. Let's work through this together, and let's come back to it. It's not final. We're going to keep having these conversations.
Awesome. Now, Jackie, I don't want you to feel like you're going to miss out on this question, so I'm going to give you a chance. How do we address
that was such a good answer. I don't really have much to add. No, I think, the thing I would, pull out of that is really validating that this actually can be a really hard experience. I think that it's really tempting as a parent to want to downplay it, to sort of try to make it seem like, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. You shouldn't be feeling FOMO, but it might really be hard, and they might really be feeling left out. And so starting the conversation there with like, it's okay that they feel that way, and it makes sense that they feel that way. And, this is the decision that we're making for our family.
Totally. All right. So we're coming close to the end here. Imagine that we're just kind of walking into the office. We jump onto an elevator and we have 2 floors to get up. And I asked you the question, what is your last thought on this whole conversation today? You got 2 floors. So that means hot take. Jack, who wants to take it first?
Okay. Yeah. So I would say approach these conversations, have the conversations with your teens, approach them in an open-minded way with curiosity in your heart. Try to put the hype and the fear and the headlines to the side if you can, if it helps you. Give yourselves grace, give your teenagers grace, because it's not easy. And this isn't easy for us. It's certainly not easy for our young people. And I think try to center their voices, try to listen to them. I really do feel like I get the best solutions and I get the best plans of action when I prompt the young people to provide them themselves, or be sort of really active participants in our family media plan. And when there are digital dilemmas, or when things kind of go awry, or when there are missteps, they're really good at troubleshooting. If you give them ideas and get those juices flowing, let them lead the way, give them agency. And our job is to keep them safe. So we will do that.
I appreciate that. Jackie?
I guess the last thing I would say that we didn't get to is just paying attention to our own tech use as parents. I think, this is, as we've been saying, this is hard for everyone. It's hard for adults. It's hard for kids. And I think we really want to be careful about our own tech use because we know it makes a big difference in our kids' tech use, both in terms of what we're modeling as parents, what they're seeing us do and then potentially doing themselves, but also in terms of how our tech use can be interfering with our relationship with them, with our time to interact and connect with them. And so, being careful about our own use, as difficult as it can be.
Role model, y'all. All right. It sounds like the message is that we are in a period of change. It is a pivot point. So it's important to talk with each other, work together, find the best practices that work for your community and your family. Thank you so much to the both of you for being here. And thank you to the audience for taking the time to learn about these really important issues. I am going to sign off now, and I'm going to pass it back to my lovely colleague, Elisa Solomon. Good night, y'all. And thank you again, Jackie and Hina.
Thanks so much, everybody. I'm so grateful for your time, Merv, and a big thank you to all of our panelists. I do think talking to one another makes such a difference. The best advice I got when my kids were little is a dad gave a kid one iPad charge a week. So the child would have to decide how to parse that out over a week. Just something to think about. Before we go, I want to make sure you know how to find all of the free resources on commonsensemedia.org. So we made this little video primer for you, and we're going to roll it now. Bye for now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Common Sense is your family's go-to source for ratings and reviews for everything including movies, games, books, and more. We're also here to support parents and caregivers with guidance on key topics such as screen time, online safety, and social media. Educators can find lesson plans and classroom tech tools. And you can learn about the important advocacy work we do to make tech safer for all kids and families. If you want access to some of our resources on the go, download our app from the App Store or Google Play. This puts our vast library of ratings and reviews right at your fingertips, wherever you are. Stay connected and informed by signing up for our free newsletters, offering everything from movie night inspiration and parenting tips to updates on how you can help us improve the digital world for kids everywhere. Sign up at commonsensemedia.org/newsletters. Supporting Common Sense means you're backing a nonprofit mission dedicated to helping families and educators thrive in a world of media and technology. Thanks for being a part of this important conversation. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more engaging discussions in the future.